I never believed the old wing of Lincoln High was haunted. Most students ignored it, treating it as an abandoned relic from the school's early days. But that changed the night I stayed late for extra study sessions. It was nearing midnight, and the hallways were eerily silent. I had chosen the library because it was the one place where I felt safe. As I organized my notes, the lights flickered. I brushed it off, thinking the old building's wiring was acting up again. But then I heard it, a faint whispering coming from the corridor outside. Curiosity gnawed at me. I left the library, following the sound, my footsteps echoing in the empty halls. The whispering grew louder, words indistinguishable but urgent. I approached the old wing, the air growing colder with each step. The door was ajar, despite the hours when it was supposed to be locked. Pushing the door open, I stepped into a long, dimly lit hallway lined with dusty lockers. My heart pounded as the whispers surrounded me, voices overlapping in a chaotic chant. I tried to pinpoint the source, but the sounds seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere. Ahead, a flickering light revealed an old classroom. The door creaked as I pushed it open, revealing rows of desks covered in thick layers of dust. At the front, a single chair faced the blackboard, where strange symbols were etched in chalk. I felt a chill run down my spine, a sense of being watched pressing against my skin. Suddenly, the door slammed shut behind me. I spun around, but no one was there. The temperature dropped further, and my breath became visible in the cold air. The whispers turned into clear voices, chanting my name. Panic seized me as shadows began to dance on the walls, twisting into grotesque shapes. I backed away, tripping over a fallen desk. Pain shot through my ankle, but I forced myself to stay upright. The shadows loomed closer, their forms becoming more defined, figures of former students, their eyes hollow and mouths open in silent screams. I could feel their anguish, a palpable sorrow that wrapped around me like a heavy blanket. Desperate, I fumbled for my phone, hoping to call for help, but it was dead. The room seemed to close in, the symbols on the board glowing faintly with an unnatural light. One of the shadowy figures extended a hand towards me, fingers elongated and twisted. I tried to move, but my legs felt like lead, rooted to the spot. The chanting intensified, now filled with malice. I could see the faces of the apparitions, contorted in pain and anger. They began to surround me, their whispers turning into cries for justice. I remembered the stories of students who had disappeared in the old wing, their spirits forever trapped within these walls. Summoning every ounce of will, I pushed against the invisible force holding me. The shadows recoiled and the room began to shake. Books flew off shelves and the symbols on the board burned brighter. With a final desperate effort, I broke free and sprinted down the hallway, the voices chasing me. Bursting through the door, I didn't stop until I reached the main entrance. The night air felt warm and real compared to the freezing horror inside. I glanced back, but the old wing stood silent, as if nothing had happened. My phone buzzed with a message from a concerned friend, reminding me to leave early. I realized how close I had come to becoming another lost soul in Lincoln High. Weeks passed, and I tried to forget that night. But sometimes late at night, I hear faint whispers echoing in my mind, a reminder of the shadows that watch from the old wing. Now, whenever I pass by Lincoln High after dark, I can't help but feel those hollow eyes following me, ensuring I never forget the night I crossed into their realm. I remember the first day I noticed something was off about Ravenwood High. It was a chilly October morning, the kind where the fog clings to the ground and the old building seemed to breathe with secrets. As I walked through the empty hallways, the usual buzz of students was absent, replaced by an eerie silence that made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. My friends and I had heard the rumors about the old wing of the school, the part that hadn't been used since the renovation last spring. They said strange things happened there, whispers in the night, shadows moving on their own, and the feeling of being watched. I always dismissed them as teenage stories until that day. It was nearing the end of the last period, and everyone was eager to leave. But our teacher, Mrs. Thompson, assigned us a group project to be completed in the library after school. The library was just past the old wing, a place none of us had ventured into beyond lunch breaks. As we gathered our books and headed towards the back, the lights flickered ominously, casting long dancing shadows across the floor. "Let's split up to finish faster," I suggested, feeling a strange pull towards the untouched sections of the library. My group agreed, and I wandered towards a corner bookshelf that seemed to whisper my name. The deeper I went, the colder it became, and the whispering grew louder, almost intelligible. I reached out to pull a book, but instead the shelf swung open, revealing a narrow, dark passageway behind it. Heart pounding, I stepped inside, the door closing silently behind me. The air was thick with dust and the scent of old paper. My flashlight flickered as I navigated the cramped corridor, each step echoing unnervingly. Suddenly I saw a faint light ahead. As I approached, the light steadied, revealing an old classroom frozen in time. Desks were scattered, and a chalkboard was covered in cryptic messages I couldn't decipher. Then I heard it, a soft humming coming from the back of the room. I turned to see a figure standing by the window, barely visible in the dim light. It was a student, or at least it looked like one, but something was terribly wrong. Its eyes were hollow, and its movements were jerky, unnatural. I tried to speak, but my voice caught in my throat. The figure began to move towards me, each step slower than the last, as if weighed down by an invisible force. I backed away, my mind racing for a way out. The temperature dropped, my breath visible in the narrow beam of my flashlight. The figure raised a hand, pointing towards the window. I followed its gaze and saw the reflection of another room behind me, filled with shadows that seemed to reach out, grasping hungrily. Panicking, I turned to flee, but the corridor had changed. The walls twisted, leading me in circles, trapping me in this nightmarish maze. The humming intensified, turning into a cacophony of whispers that echoed my deepest fears. I stumbled, feeling hands brush against my shoulders, pulling me back into the darkness. Just as I felt completely lost, a distant bell rang, breaking the spell. The corridor began to dissolve, and I found myself back in the main library, gasping for breath. My friends were nowhere to be seen, and the entrance to the old wing was firmly shut. I looked around, trying to make sense of what had happened, but the library was empty, the shadows no longer moving. We quickly finished our project and left, the normalcy of the school day returning as we stepped outside. But the experience left a lingering unease. That night, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched, the whispers echoing in my mind. I avoided the old wing after that, but sometimes late at night, I swear I can hear the faint hum of that forgotten classroom, calling me back to Ravenwood High's dark secrets. I remember the final bell ringing on that chilly October day, signaling the end of another mundane school day. As I packed my bag, I noticed the old auditorium, usually deserted after hours, had its doors slightly ajar. Curiosity gnawed at me. Schoolmates often whispered about strange occurrences there, but I never paid much attention until that day. Deciding to satisfy my curiosity, I slipped out of the crowded hallway and made my way towards the auditorium. The halls were eerily silent, the only sound being the soft echo of my footsteps. As I approached the doors, a shiver ran down my spine. Pushing them open, I stepped into the dimly lit space. The stage was empty, dust particles dancing in the beam of my flashlight. I called out softly, "Is anyone here?" My voice seemed to disappear into the vastness of the room. I moved towards the back, where old props and forgotten costumes lay scattered. Suddenly I heard a faint whispering sound. My heart pounded as I followed the noise, feeling a presence I couldn't see. The whispers grew louder, forming indistinct words that sent chills through me. I reached a corner of the stage where an old mirror leaned against the wall. Its surface was tarnished, reflecting a distorted image of the room. As I stepped closer, the temperature dropped. My breath became visible, and the whispers turned into clear voices, chanting my name. Panic seized me, but my feet felt rooted to the spot. In the mirror, I saw a shadowy figure standing behind me. I spun around, but the auditorium was empty. Turning back to the mirror, the figure reached out towards me, its eyes hollow and lifeless. Fear took over, and I turned to run, but the door slammed shut, trapping me inside. Desperately, I searched for another exit, but every door I tried was locked tight. The whispers intensified, now accompanied by ghostly apparitions that floated around the room, their faces twisted in anguish. I stumbled into the center of the auditorium, the floor beneath me seeming to dissolve into darkness. A cold hand gripped my shoulder, and I felt an overwhelming sense of despair. The shadowy figure pressed closer, its voice a haunting melody. "Stay with us." I screamed, the sound echoing off the walls, but no one heard me outside. Just as I felt consumed by the darkness, the first light of dawn seeped through the windows. The apparitions faded, and the doors creaked open. I bolted out of the auditorium, gasping for fresh air, my heart still racing. As I caught my breath in the empty hallway, I glanced back at the auditorium. The doors were firmly shut, and everything seemed normal. Shaken, I made my way home, the events replaying in my mind. The next day, I couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed. When I mentioned the auditorium to a friend, she looked uneasy and warned me about the old building. That night, I researched the auditorium's history and discovered it had been the site of a tragic accident decades ago. A group of students had perished during a performance gone wrong. Their restless spirits were said to wander the halls, forever seeking closure. Determined to understand what happened to me, I returned to the auditorium a week later, armed with a recorder and a notebook. As I entered, the atmosphere was tense but not hostile. I began speaking softly, asking the spirits to communicate. Minutes passed with no response, and I felt a flicker of doubt. Then my recorder began to pick up a faint, sorrowful melody, a song the lost students had performed on that fateful night. Suddenly, the room filled with a gentle light, and the apparitions appeared once more, their faces serene. They gestured towards the mirror, which now reflected a peaceful scene instead of the dark chaos before. Understanding washed over me. They weren't malevolent, just seeking remembrance and peace. As the light faded, the auditorium felt warm and welcoming. The doors opened effortlessly, and I knew the spirits had finally found closure. Leaving the building, I felt a profound sense of relief and connection. From that day on, the auditorium was no longer a place of fear, but a silent testament to the past, reminding me that some stories linger, waiting to be heard and understood.